Unfortunately, we are right in the middle of panic time for a lot of hunters. It's June. That means, some guys are starting their hunts next month in July. A lot of sheep hunts start in July. I know some of the archery mule deer hunts in California start in July. We have guys sheep hunting and even some elk seasons open in August. And then, the majority of us are looking at September 1st. And so we don't have a lot of time, right? But it's panic time for a lot of folks because they feel like they haven't been doing enough work up to now. And so they're like, oh, well, I got to make up for it. And so what happens is they end up doing a bunch of super intense conditioning, and they end up doing rucking and packing workouts that are just way too heavy because they're scared. They're not ready to carry a heavy pack. And so it ends up leaving them unprepared and likely a little beat up, But, one of the biggest things there is like you have to use your most valuable asset when it comes to training, which is time. And that's why training year round is so important, because you never really have to get into panic mode. You just have to tweak and prioritize for performance, And so this episode is obviously called How Should Hunters Train in June? And I wrote an article for the Pack Mule Journal on our website that outlines some of this stuff too. And I'm going to link it in the show notes, and I'm going to bounce them back and forth between the actual program in the training app and the article as I walk you through everything on this podcast. So the first thing that we have to think about when it comes to June is, well, we have to ask ourselves a question, and that is, what matters right now? And of course, being able to be efficient under load matters. Of course, being able to have endurance matters, and being able to go uphill and downhill. All of those things are really important for the things that we want to do. Whether you have upland seasons open in September, you're elk hunting, you got a sheep hunt. Obviously, each of those kind of hunts are tweaked in different ways. But these are the things that matter. I mean, even, an upland hunter, your vest gets heavy, especially when it's hot and you're running multiple dogs and you're carrying all their water, your water, emergency kit, shells, you kill a few birds, like your vest adds up pretty quick. So all of these things matter, but we have to stop and ask ourselves that question first. And we should often ask ourselves that question. But as we get closer to the season, we have to ask ourselves that question again, I guess is what I want to say, and then be even more detailed with our answers, because our priorities get pretty specific at this point in the year. And so we have to make sure that we dial in on those. And, the first thing, especially at this part of the early preseason, is specific muscular endurance training for uphills. As the preseason continues, we don't think about as much about just specific qualities. We go and we put them all together and we go out and do more of the thing that replicates what we're going to do. But at this point, we want to really develop the specific things that we need so that we can go display them, right? So there's development and then there's displaying. And so we're still at this point in the training year focused on developing a few things, And one of those big things is muscular endurance in our legs, because what happens to a lot of guys is their legs go before their lungs, because they just fatigue out and they actually can't even push hard enough. But what happens is the thought process, they go back and remember a hard hike where they ended up breathing so hard that they're fucking sucking so hard that the pine cones start shaking on the tree. And so they go and they try to replicate that, and they think that that's what they need to do to be ready. But what they don't ask themselves is whether or not it should have been that difficult. That's the first question we should ask. And it didn't have to be that difficult, right? But we see these things that we fear, or these feelings that we had, and we try to replicate them. So we have like a mental model of how that feels like and what it's going to feel like when we go do it again. But we don't think about, okay, well, what are the steps that we could do to make that easier? And developing your lower body muscular endurance is a really important aspect of that. Now, we've been talking about that for the past few months, and we've been doing elements of it for the past few months. But at this point in the year, we get a little bit more specific with that. And so right now, we're doing some zone 3 uphill intervals. And I like them doing them in zone 3 at this point of the year, because we've been mostly doing stuff in zone 2. And we've been doing step ups and things like that, high intensity continuous training, you know, things that we've talked about on the past few, when we've done episodes like this, the past few episodes like this. But I like zone 3 because it puts you in that moderate intensity. So if you want to replicate the feeling, it'll feel like a hard uphill. So if that's something that's important to you, but even more importantly, it puts us at a level of intensity that we can sustain and develop these qualities in our muscles, and we can develop muscular endurance in our slow twitch muscles as well as our fast twitch muscles. And so it's like working at about a 6 to 7 intensity out of 10 for most people. If you're a monster, it's probably going to feel more like 5 to 6, but for most people, it's going to be somewhere in the 6 to 7. And if you're not in very good shape, you shouldn't be doing it right now anyway. You should be sticking to your aerobic training, quite honestly, because you grab the low hanging fruit first. But, you know, for our folks, both Pathfinder and Backcountry ready, most of them have done the requisite aerobic work up to this point in the year to get the most out of this kind of training. And so they're doing it. So we're doing uphill intervals with that, you know, either on the stair climber, on terrain, or on the incline treadmill with a good incline, anywhere from 15 to 20% on the treadmill. And then obviously stair climbers are a steeper incline than that. And we're working at a sustained pace around that heart rate zone. Now, the heart rate zone is just a proxy for what's going on in our bodies metabolically, right? But when we're working at that intensity, zone 3, you're about 50-50 aerobic and anaerobic energy production. So you build out the top end of your aerobic system. It makes it easier for you to sustain work at relatively higher intensities, and it builds that muscular endurance that we're looking for. Another thing that it does for us is it gets us under packs that are a bit heavier. So, you know, for us, I'm having folks, depending on where they're at on the spectrum and how much time under their pack they've accrued, somewhere between 20% and 30% of their body weight. You know, 30% of your body weight for most folks gets relatively heavy, you know. And so if you're one of those guys or girls that worries about the feeling of being under a heavy pack, it gets you that feeling, but also that amount of weight is a good load for actually creating the conditions that we need to develop muscular endurance, because you're doing sustained muscular contractions under a decent load for a relatively long duration. And, you know, so as you accrue that, you start to build more and more muscular endurance, while also, you know, improving the top end of your aerobic system and getting more and more efficient under load, which is really important. And then it comes down to priorities. And since that is our main priority, you know, we switch things up during this training phase, and we do our zone 3 uphill intervals first day of the training week. We want to go into them fresh. We want to get the most out of them that we possibly can. And so we do them first. And then there's a second, we do the same workout. A lot of our folks are doing the same workout later in the week as well, because just to get the total volume in, to really push our muscular endurance so that we can utilize it later in training and then also get the most out of it when hunting season comes. So folks that have done enough aerobic work leading up to this point in the year, they'll do it on Mondays, and then they'll also do it again on Thursdays. Now, our folks that haven't got enough aerobic volume but have been relatively consistent with it, they'll just do one. They'll do the Monday session, and then on Thursday, they'll do a zone 2 uphill session just to continue to build that aerobic volume. And you still build muscular endurance when you're doing that. This is just a little bit more intense version of muscular endurance training. So those are the kind of the options there for that. So it's the main priority. So we give it the most training volume, and multiple doses of it, and if needed by the person, and then also putting it at points in the week where we'll be the most fresh. So, coming off the weekend, we have a rest day on Sunday, and then we rest again on Wednesdays after strength, which we'll talk about in a second, and then we do it again on Thursdays. So we put it at the 2 points in the week where we'll be freshest, so we can get the most out of it, because we don't want to accrue a bunch of fatigue and then go into those sessions and then try to push to the point that we need to push, because we'll get something out of it, but just not as much as we possibly could. And we really want to, that's our priority. So we want to get as much out of it as we possibly can. And then, we look at the rest of the training week. So we have Tuesday, we're doing a heavier strength session. And then Friday, we'll do a unilateral strength session, which means one limited time, and then a long aerobic session on the weekend. And I'm going to walk through all of those for you. So our first strength session of the week, we do on Tuesdays, and it's a heavier strength session. But here's the thing. We've put strength into maintenance for this phase. Main thing is developing muscular endurance. So it goes into a maintenance type volume. So we just don't do it as much, and we just give ourselves enough that we need to maintain it. And then, from an exercise selection standpoint, we're doing the things that are going to give us the most benefit in the field. So, we talked in May, folks still had the option to deadlift or squat. In June, it's different squat variations because they have the most carryover to moving uphill and downhill. So 3 different squat variations for them to choose from. And then also bent over row variations, because we need the resiliency in our back, both for packing and for being bent over skinning animals, right? So when you skin elk, you could be bent over for quite a long time, skinning a moose even longer. And so we want to build that resiliency. So those are our 2 main strength exercises, and we're doing anywhere from 3 to 5 reps with, around 4 reps in reserve. So we get enough weight and just enough training volume to maintain our strength as we push our muscular endurance is the main goal with that. But we're also we do power work on those days as well. And so the main goal of our power work on the strength, the main big strength day, is to improve the resilience and repeat ability of our quads to fire, both for uphill and downhill movement. And so we hold an ISO, and then we rest for maybe 15 seconds, and we go right into repeated vertical jumps. So we do a goblet squat ISO, tension on the quads for 15 seconds or so, and then we go jump. And that time under tension combined with the jumps not only improves our power output, because it's when you hold an ISO, the nerve signals are similar to what you would get from doing something fast. So not only does that happen, but that time under tension and then a jump, like we just start to build more and more resilient quads. And a lot of times, when you're out hunting, the first thing to cramp is your quads, or the first thing to just fatigue is your quads. And so we're just building resilient quads while also giving ourselves the ability to continue to produce power over time, which is important as a human, but also important for us because if you can produce more power, it means you can use your strength faster, which means that everything that happens at a lower relative cost to what you're capable of. So it helps to save you energy. And then, with core work on that day, we're really working on our anterior core and make sure it stays rigid so that, we are resilient under our packs. And then, looking at the assistance work on that day, it's pretty straightforward. We're doing some hamstring curls and stuff like that to build resiliency in our hamstrings for uphills. We're pressing to balance out our upper body strength, and we're doing heavy calf raises. We cut the volume on our calf raises up until this part of the year. We've been doing a lot of high volume calf work as well to build resilience in our quads and muscular endurance in our quads. But we're doing so much uphill work and rucking and stuff like that we actually giving ourselves more of that now could be detrimental. So we're just maintaining the strength of our quads with some heavier our calves with some heavier calf work on that day. And it's, like I said, it's just about maintenance. We just need to maintain our strength as we build our muscular endurance, because one of the biggest mistakes that I see across a lot of training programs, not just hunting, is trying to develop everything at once. And so giving each aspect of training the same amount of volume and intensity, and you just can't do that, especially if you're someone that's been training for a while. All you're going to do is give your body too much stress, and you're going to end up burning out and sliding and going backwards. The only people that benefit that from that are absolute beginners. Though you could legitimately put them on an air bike for 30 seconds, doing 30-second intervals a few times per week, and their bench press would go up, just because they're so raw, their nervous system and everything is just going to respond to whatever you give it. But people that train, you can't do that. It's just, they're too efficient. They'll have too much output, and it'll give them just way too much stress, and you'll go backwards. So we have to pick the things. We develop one or two things, maybe, depending on the training phase and time of year, and everything else goes into maintenance, or what you might call stimulatory training, right? Just enough to stimulate the quality so that you keep it. And so that's what we're doing with that. And then our second strength workout of the week is on Fridays. And now this is all unilateral training, which means single limb, which helps create balance through our body. But also this is a place where we're incorporating more movements that will help translate directly to moving uphill and downhill. And with the power work, we're doing some 1 foot rebound jumps. We've talked about rebound jumps before. We're building resilience in our feet, ankles, and lower legs, but also that spring helps save us energy because we take a lot of steps, so we're just doing 15 seconds per side. So it's a 15 seconds per side. And they're really, really, really good at, making your ankles strong, your feet strong, and saving you energy, and we work on ankle mobility, we do all that kind of stuff, but this helps to even make your tendons and ligaments and things like that in your ankles stronger, because, it's not if you're going to stumble, it's when. It's not if you're going to turn your ankle a little bit, it's when. And then when you do that, when you have, 40 pounds on your back, when you're packing in, it creates a bigger risk factor for you to actually hurt your ankle. And so we're making our ankles resilient so that when that happens, you just turn it, it doesn't get injured, and then you just keep on walking, right? And so that's part of the deal. And then, the core work with that is all about being able to keep our hips stable, but especially under our pack, and also resist the lateral bend of our pack and the rotation of our pack on our bodies. Because whether you feel it or not, it's happening. Your pack is trying to turn you all the time. It's trying to bend you over. It's trying to pull you backwards. And so we're doing a couple core exercises with that. One being a half kneeling kettlebell lift, which helps you train to fight rotation while keeping your hips stable. And then different variations of a Copenhagen plank, which makes the insides of your legs really strong and resilient, but also trains the outside of your core, or what would be called the lateral part of your core, to be really strong and resist flexion, resist being bent to the side. And so that really coincides well with not only being able to stay stable on terrain with our feet, but also be able to stay sturdy under our packs, And then, we're doing forward lunges because building resiliency in the quad for downhills. And we'll progress those into more intense variations. But right now we're just doing regular old forward lunges. We're doing some more bent over row variations for that low back. And then, our mobility work at this point in the year shifts from general mobility to direct movements that we would do in the mountains. So we take what we've built with the raw materials and we start to put them into practice with things we might encounter in the mountains. So for example, we're doing something called a step over. You can do it on a bench, or you can do it with a bar, but you step over laterally and then step back over the other way. And just think about stepping over logs, stepping up onto boulders, any kind of awkward step you might want to take. So the leg that you're planted on is trained for stability for that. The leg that you're stepping over with, you're getting hip mobility and everything out of that directly translates to the way that you're going to move in the mountains. We're doing single leg RDLs because making your hamstrings resilient is huge. And also a single leg RDL is pretty close to the angle that you will move at going uphill under load, because even if we want to stay upright as possible when we're under our packs, but you're going to get bent over a little bit, especially when you're going uphill. And so that single leg RDL movement, it replicates that and gives our hamstrings and glutes and everything some strength. And also, you build some hip ankle and foot stability because you're doing everything on one leg. Also, I mean, you're fighting rotation, right? Whether you're doing it with a dumbbell or a kettlebell in each hand, or a kettlebell just in your hand opposite of the leg that's working, which would be contralateral single leg RDL. Your body has to fight rotation because you're just planted on one limb, which translates over to all the stuff that we just talked about with fighting the rotation of our pack. And then we're doing single arm pressing. And I really like this, not just for maintaining upper body strength and stability and all that, but if you do a single arm bench press, you have to fight rotation the whole time. So it's not just a good upper body pressing exercise or a good shoulder stability exercise. It's also a really good anti-rotation exercise, which builds your core for fighting the rotation of your pack too. And so that's one of the reasons we're doing that. Other folks we have also a half kneeling overhead press variation included as well. But the single arm dumbbell bench press is going to help you fight rotation even more. So we have that in there. And then we're doing something called a standing ankle car. And we do that with both feet planted on the ground. And it takes your ankles and your feet through that range of motion that you might get close to when you stumble or roll your ankle or whatever it might be. So not only do your tissues get more resilient from being in that position, but then your brain has a strategy. Your brain and also your peripheral nerves have a strategy for that position because they've been in it before, right? So we're making it more, we're just giving it reps. So your brain and your body know what to do with that position. And often that's the time that we get injured, right? Because we go into a position that our tissues aren't prepared for, our muscles, our tendons, our ligaments, and that our nervous system doesn't have a strategy for moving into and out of. And so we have to get into these awkward positions so that when we get there in the mountains, it doesn't cost so much that we get hurt, right? And so we're doing things like that to start to build resilience in our ankles, our feet, things like that. And then we have a long aerobic session over the weekend. So somewhere between 90 and 120 minutes. A great option for this is just to go out and hike. And if people want to ruck on this one, we're doing it with lighter weight, right? You don't want to jump into long rucking sessions with heavy weight because you're just going to beat the piss out of yourself. You're going to give yourself too much stress and it's going to be difficult to recover. And so right now we're going back down to like 15% of our body weight if people want to ruck on these sessions, just so we don't give ourselves too much stress. I'm honestly just hiking with no weight on these sessions because we're doing this for a couple of purposes. First, you need long duration work to continue to build and maintain the durability of your aerobic system. We'll do even longer sessions as the summer goes on, but with the intensity of the zone 3 sessions, we have to bump back volume. So if you bump intensity and volume at the same time, typically for most people, it's going to be too much. So we're sticking with 90 to 120 minutes to cut that back. And then if you look at what most of the typical volume for the typical aerobic volume for our Pathfinder and Backcountry Ready members through the first part of the year, it was somewhere between 3 and 4 hours a week. And so to maintain your what you've gained, you just need to be around 50% of what you did. And so that one long session accrues about 50% of the volume that the folks did to build their aerobic system during the early part of the year. So it's perfect for that. And so we have the long duration stuff to build the durability of our aerobic system across time, so it continues to produce energy, stably. I don't know if that stably is a word, but I think you understood what I meant. And so it increases the ability to do that, but then also it just maintains our aerobic system with about half the volume it took to develop it. And so that's a good place to be. Now we're fueling these workouts. First, because we want to perform as well as possible during them, and then also to recover from them, right? So as you go out and you do stuff for longer, you just suck more resources. And so if you don't give your body some resources to do that, you just take more than you should, and it's tougher to recover, and then it's tough to come back into the next training week and get out of it what you need to get out of it. So we are without a doubt fueling those with carbs. And I put guidelines in for our folks on how many they should eat per hour, during those sessions, so that they just do well, they perform and they recover. And so it's one of those things where, I think one of the important things to note is you still get the aerobic adaptations out of that. You still get better at utilizing fat for fuel. You still have metabolic flexibility, which is your ability to switch between carbs for fuel and fat for fuel. All of that good stuff happens because it's mostly determined by aerobic training volume more than anything else. And so if you're doing enough volume, you'll still get all of that nice stuff that you want to happen, right? The biggest thing is you don't want to still be burning carbs at rest. And when you don't have a well-developed aerobic system, that's what happens. And that's why you see guys go out on day one, they're fine. Day two, they start to get fatigued. And then by day three, they're cooked because they didn't have the aerobic system to support all of their activity. And so they're using carbs to burn them through a bunch of carbs at rest to try to recover. And then they deplete glycogen, they deplete other resources. And that's why they end up feeling like shit. And they just can't go really after day three, So that's the biggest thing. And that's why building aerobic volume up to this point in the year is so important. And just maintaining your aerobic system year round, because it gives you the endurance to live your life and to feel better, and it makes your brain work better, and it's good for longevity and everything that we want, so we can live active lives that we enjoy, but also so we can hunt for as long as we want to, right? So that's why we're doing that. And then I do have 2 optional 30-minute zone 1 work program days programmed. So they're with the strength days. And there's zone 1 instead of zone 1/2 now to bring back that intensity like we talked about. So we don't want to give too much intensity when we're doing the zone 3 uphill workouts. So we back those down to zone 1. They're going to help recovery, right? Working at that intensity is going to help recovery. But also if someone wants to keep their aerobic volume up a little bit, there's 2 little, like if you do both of them, there's an hour, right? So that's great. So for the people that aren't doing 2 zone 3 sessions, they're doing a 60-minute zone 2 session instead. So that's, if you look across the week, that's, 3.5 to 4 hours of aerobic work, which if they do all of it, which is a great place to be. So, but that's how we're training in June. Now, the biggest thing is like, if you haven't done a bunch of aerobic work up to this point in the year, and you're really just getting started with, you're thinking about getting started with your training for hunting season, aerobic work is going to move the needle for you most. You got to grab the low hanging fruit first. So I would focus on that before you even worry too much about getting into the zone 3 uphill stuff. So general aerobic work, and then your uphill work should be aerobic as well. Starting with a lighter pack, building up, and going from there until you accrue enough volume and you start to see, you're getting faster, things are getting easier, the weight feels lighter, and then progressing up for there. So that's one thing that I just wanted to make sure that I noted, that the people that are doing the zone 3 work have done enough aerobic work to get there, to get the most out of it. So it's important that you would follow the same process if you're not training with us. So on that note, probably ought to be, right? You ought to be training with us. So that in Backcountry Ready, you come in, I test you first. So we look at what your aerobic system's like right now. We look at what your muscular endurance is like right now. We look at what your strength and your mobility is like right now. And we set you on the right path through our programming for you at this point, so that you are dialed in, you can progress, and you can progress without beating the shit out of yourself. And so by hunting season, you're dialed in, you have the endurance to go all day, multiple days, you're strong and resilient enough to handle it, and you move well enough to keep yourself safe, but also keep from wasting a bunch of energy with inefficient movements. And then you get my judgment with that, right? I've been doing this for 20 years. I've been training hunters for 7 years. So you don't have to make these decisions by yourself. I look at this, I set you up for success, and then I guide you through the process. So Backcountry Ready, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to sign up for that. And, even if you've been training up to now and you want to get these final few months of prep before hunting season dialed in, sign up. We'll get you pointed in the right direction, and we'll get you dialed in to get to where you want to be. I'm also going to put the link to the How Should Hunters Train in June article in the show notes as well. So if you want to go, you listen to this, you want to go read and just help the information absorb more, that'll be there as well. So I'll put both of those in the show notes. As always, I appreciate you being here, and thank you for listening and watching, whichever how you did it. And I'll be back with a new episode next week.